Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Kiesner, and we'll be talking about the SSAT and ISEE and what parents need to know about these tests to help your students get into the middle school or high school that they're looking for. So we'll be going through both tests and some of the differences between them, some study plans, and we'll have a little Q&A at the end as well. So my name is Matt Kiesner. I'm the structural designer here at Applerouth, and I definitely do a lot of work with middle school tests. So this is definitely in my comfort zone. Once I can figure out to advance the slide. All right, so we'll talk about what's going on, for this upcoming school year for SSAT and ISEE. We'll talk about each of the tests, understanding how these get used by schools, building a testing timeline and a study plan for those, for both of those tests. So you might have the question of like, well, which test should my student take? And it really doesn't matter that it is different than you would find on the SAT or ACT, where you could take either test for college admissions. A lot of schools partner with one of the tests, and it can be a something where you definitely want to check the admissions page per school you're applying to. That's going to be beneficial to check on this. And some places have it where the like some regions are very SSAT heavy, some are ISE heavy, some places are a mix of both. So hopefully you figure out what that is. There's the schools that take both are fewer than you would think on there, because really both of these tests try to get their alignment with the schools to align with only one of those tests there. So you'll need to do the research depending on what you're looking at. So we'll talk about the SSAT first. So there are 3 levels to SSAT. There's the elementary there's actually a 3rd and 4th grade tests that are a little bit different. There's the middle level, which is for students currently in 5th through 7th. So that would be applying for middle school, 6th, 7th, 8th. And then there's the upper, which is students that are currently in grades 8 through 11, and that's going to be admissions for high school, so admissions through 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. Most people who take the upper level test are at 8th grade because they're in a terminating middle school. So it is a SAT is used by the private schools, and it's affiliated by Enrollment Management Association. They also make a version of a like a kind of the equivalent of a common app for admissions packets. So if you are applying to different schools, it used to be called the SSAT board, and it is a regional business. There are certain places in the U.S. where it is almost exclusively SSAT. They have a good lock on that market. So the SSAT did some changes back in 2020 due to the pandemic, and those changes are staying they're consistent. So there's been just knowing that there's different ways that students could test. So there will be the SSAT at home. That was their way of mitigating pandemic restrictions by having students test at home. That will still be a thing. And there was no, I think they put the investment in that infrastructure, and they're going to continue to want to do that. The students can take it at a parametric testing center. There's the paper-based flex and benchmark testing, which are kind of paper tests on demand, and then just your classic paper-based testing monthly during the fall and winter. So we'll talk about some differences on here. So the home they offer pretty much every Saturday, at least during the school year, and then they also have one Sunday per month. There's also multiple start times. This is so that they're not asking students on the West Coast to start at like 5 a.m. But that also might be nice, because if you have an East Coast student who might prefer to take the test at noon versus getting up at 9 a.m. or something. So that there's a lot more options for those. And so it's going to be a testing using a secure browser that you would download ahead of time. And that browser will restrict what the computer can do. It basically, it locks down the computer so that you can no longer access the any other applications, including the calculator, and or go on a on the internet or anything like that. But it is important to definitely do a system check beforehand and make sure that that works before testing day. During it, they can have just have paper, so sheets of paper, pencils, and they can have water. There is going to be a room check in there, but they're going to make sure that they should have a clear desk and that they're not not having like a cell phone or any kind of dictionary or anything like that would be helpful on the test. Parents can be in the room for the room check. I would recommend that just because, especially for the younger students, having someone on a computer tell you to search your room and like make sure that your pockets are empty and stuff. It's kind of weird, and I can see that's definitely I think it's a good parenting experience to make sure that you're there so that you're ask any questions or anything at that point. So there is a good bit of security on this. Students will be on camera and with their microphone live on there. I have had some of my students that I've worked with take the test, and they've gotten flagged for looking away from the screen, that they basically expect you to look here or down at your paper. And the student in question was just kind of staring up at the ceiling and sort of in a contemplative moment. And actually there was a little warning that you keep your eyes on the testing on the screen there. So they are using eye tracking software on there. And so they, she didn't get kicked out, thankfully, but that was something to watch out for. But structurally, that home test is exactly the same as paper tests. The only difference is that students can move. There isn't like a global timer. It's a timer per event, right, per that one test. So if a student finishes early on a section, that student does have the ability to move on to the next section, and that would close that previous section, and they can start on there. So this is definitely a double-edged sword. I mean, yes, a student who is a fast test taker can finish quicker and be done with it, but I've seen students not have like the maturity to self-evaluate on there. And I had one of my students who was a fifth grader who took this the at-home test, finished in 40 minutes, which is like the test is like about 3 hours. So clearly he did not use that responsibility well. So I think it's important to make sure that if you do that at home, knowing that you can't, once you leave that section, you cannot return to it, and you're not going to have like that a bunch of extra time at the end where you can review your work. It does close. So it is the same as there is, EMA does offer a computer-based practice test. They have an online product at SSAT.org. And so you could, if you were to purchase that, you could be able to look at what, that the test platform is. It's very basic. It's basically just a click on the answers that you want, and then, some navigation things. You see one question per, one question at a time, and you kind of move through it. There's nothing to annotate or make notes or do anything like that a lot of other testing platforms have. So that it is as minimal as you could get away with. One good thing is that the SAT at home, it does get scores quickly. So it's about 4 business days. So you'll have them right away on there. Alternatively, there's Prometric. If you have done a sort of if you have took a grad school test like the GRE, you may have gone to a Prometric center. They're all over, and they it's where you go and use a computer and take a test. So they also offer there. So this would be that the student would not have to bring their own device. There would be a computer that is provided for them, and set that up. So why do it? I've had some students take parametric and they feel weird because they're the only kid and the rest of them are college students or complete adults taking tests for graduate programs and whatnot. But it is like it's a distraction-free testing environment. I mean, it's designed to be quiet and secure, and you don't have to worry about internet connectivity or like having to download on your device. Having if the kid's only an iPad user, then you don't have to find a laptop for them to use or and set that up. So that could also be a benefit. So for this upcoming year, students could take the computer-based SSAT time. So that is both the at-home and prometric. That is a change from prior years. Previously, it had been 3 times, but they've limited it for whatever reason. They have probably to reduce the number of test forms that they need to have. But that is a change for this year. So there's at least 1 fewer opportunities to take the SSAT. But there is the flex test. So flex test is a paper test that students can schedule once per school year. Last year they did it twice. They did a seasonal flex test, and like I said, that didn't work great, so they've gone back to just once per year. So typically it's given by a counselor or consultant or IEC they've arranged with. So the SSAT page will help you find a flex test provider in your region if you need to take a test of that style. And otherwise, it's like a normal paper-based SSAT. It's just that you can schedule, whenever you want. So hence it's the flexible scheduling of that. There's also a benchmark test that is something that school can register for. So sometimes they'll administer it, including like schools that are K through 12, that they will actually administer the test to their students who are in 8th grade who are continuing on, to basically see like it, to see what their population's testing norms are, and then use that to evaluate new applicants that are becoming in for 9th grade on there. But that's not something that a parent can sign up a student for. That's something that just know that may show up. Some terminating schools will also use a benchmark test to to basically have a private SSAT for their students, that if you're on a K through 8 school or something similar to that. And the standard tests start in October. They're typically the second Saturday, with maybe some variants on there. And they go, all throughout the spring, though most testing typically ends around February, because it becomes an issue when with the emission deadlines and stuff on there. So there is to all we've talked about, is so far has been really about the middle and upper level tests. There is the elementary level test that for 3rd and 4th graders. It's a relatively new product for the SSAT. The elementary is only given in person on paper, so there's no at-home version of it, and it starts in December, so it's late testing compared to the middle and upper, and so you can only take it twice in person. The elementary level is it's a shorter test. It obviously has a less complex math, and is a little bit different, but there's not a lot of schools that use it, because honestly 3rd and 4th grade is kind of a typical time to be transferring schools. If you're looking at like like sticking with elementary school, then middle school, then high school, so typically it's something where a family wants to, they may have a student who's going in 8th grade or going into 6th grade, and then they have a student who is in 2nd or 3rd grade, who might be testing this to kind of like follow the elder student along to the hopefully the next school. So we're going to focus on the middle and upper level. The rest of this is the middle and upper have the same structure and timing, and there are some differences obviously in the math particularly, but they're all the structures and stuff are the same on those. So we'll focus on some of the the things you need to know on there. So here's the structure. So it's going to start with There's an essay that's unscored. There's quantitative, which is just their fancy word for math. There is reading comprehension, which is passages. There's verbal, which is a mix of synonym and analogies questions. There's another quantitative section that's just more math. And there is an experimental section that is mandatory and that is unscored on there. So for the essay, it's 25 minutes, which is not a lot of time to write an essay. And they're getting 2 prompts. The middle level is one's gonna be narrative, and that'll be like the beginning of a story. And one's personal. For the upper level, one is personal, the other one's like analytical. So personal is like an experience you've had, and the analytical one is like more abstract, like what should a school provide its students and stuff. So it is essentially the schools for evaluation, and that I think is they're gonna that's their that's what they're gonna be using it for. I think they're testing on if they ask you for a writing sample ahead of time, then they're might compare the two and to kind of see how accurate that writing sample is ahead of time. And also I think it is kind of a informal psych evaluation of like, did this kid write something sensible and kind, or did they write something that is like, distressing? So the good advice that is like, write something that is part of a first impression, like that makes you sound good. That's the advice I always give my students. All right, so they have the math. Calculators are not permitted on the SSAT. The only exception is that if a student has an accommodation, they can get a calculator, but it has to be like a 4-function basic calculator. They can't have a scientific calculator that can handle, exponents or things like that. So the quantitative technique does have a lot of logical reasoning and problem solving. It is not a test of to bruise your way through math. It's not there to make you do really difficult math. It's to test if you can be clever with math and sort of see the easy way out. The SSAT at its heart is an old school IQ test. And it is an old-fashioned test. I think that was a lot of students. It's a new kind of experience. Is not similar to the kind of tests that they have in school. So both middle and upper is going to have some arithmetic concepts, algebra, geometry. Upper level is going to have more math. Is going to go into like some algebra 1 concepts and some pre-algebra concepts. You see some linear equations, even a little bit of like quadratic factoring, but at a pretty basic level on there. The middle level is going to be, it's primarily concerned with the relationship of fractions and decimals and percentages and probability, and understanding that those things are all kind of talking about the same thing. So good suggestions on quantitative, like read questions carefully. They are worded to be tricky. A lot of times there is a reasonable wrong answer, and this could be like they ask for the area of the circle, and the wrong answer is the circumference. So they write down your work on there, and then double check that you answer the question asked. These are all some very great advice, because there is more often not, it's these questions are tricky versus like actually mathematically difficult. So there's some examples of they have here. Here's a circle one, but it asks for the diameter, so of course like the radius is one of the wrong answers and stuff. But they're definitely going to test on basic geometry. And if you're working with a 5th grader, or so if you have 5th grader, I work with 5th graders, you might notice that you're going to probably have to push into some greater math. They make getting them comfortable with the idea of pi and comfortable with the idea of coefficients. Those are both ideas that most 5th graders have not been exposed to. And then these sort of things where it looks like it's terrible, gross division, but really we can guesstimate this way, and by like set it up as we can round this to 60,000. Pardon the poor handwriting on them, trying to write fast. Divide by 2,000, and then we just cancel out some zeros, and we're left with 60 over 2, which is 30. A lot of students will look at this originally and they'll do it the hard way. They will do long division, and like they may get the answer right, but that's an issue of time, right? So it's about being clever with math. So reading that, you'll have about 7 or 8 passages, about 5 to 6 questions per passage. It varies a little bit on the business test form. It is a mix of all kinds of writings, narrative, expository, persuasive, and there are definitely some older passages in there. You expect to see some stuff from Victorian literature and that, and you might even see a poem in there. There's lots of questions about inference and like tone of the passage. They really do like testing on the author's tone, and then using that to test advanced vocabulary in terms of like adjectives. So one thing good is you'll read carefully and actively. You'll really try to understand the passage, summarize it. Now, obviously, you can't underline things if you're taking the at-home test, but you still have the paper and writing some notes to kind of help understand the key ideas could be useful. One of the best things that you do answer is like it's easier to answer by process elimination. On the answer choices, and then getting comfortable with like tone words, like analytical, ambivalent, appreciative, and figurative language. They will ask you like they might give you a line, ask you it's an example of what figurative language, and the answers are metaphor and personification or satire, things like that. Those can kind of be a bit much for some students. And then there's a verbal section. So it starts off with 30 synonym questions, go easy to hard, and then 30 analogy questions go easy to hard. And so synonyms it's just a word without any context. And a lot of times they may use like a common word, but a lesser meaning. So like the word's flag, you might think banner or pennant, but the word could be signal because you're using it as a verb, that kind of thing. And then analogy tests the relationships between words. And that's, that could be hammer is to carpenter. So like a hammer is used by a carpenter, things like that. And so we can see this on here. You see, you have this one objective. Objective has a lot of meanings, right? But knowing that it is it's an adjective form, which is the adjective form, which is not objective as a noun, which would mean goal. And a student may think that I think offensive because you might object to something that is offensive, right? But that's a different use of the word. That's not what objective means. And so here it's actually talking about neutral, like an objective tone, right? Which is not having a bias. So C would be the best answer. And then E is like literally the opposite, right? And then concerned is a frantic. So students will think these are the same, but the important analogy is that, or an important type of analogy is that frantic is more than concerned. And so like seeing that difference of degree is what's important, because it's not frigid is not bump is not more than frigid. They're kind of opposites. Perturbed is not more than furious. That if these were reversed, it might be right. Elated is content. Yeah, elated is stronger than content. Perplexed is stronger than sad. No real relationship there. Reserved is stronger than ecstatic. No. So the answer there would be C. And then there's the experimental section. It's not score, but students can't opt out. It's like a mix of questions on there. So then next we'll talk about the SSAT scoring, which is it's a little wild. So they offer a scaled score, and it's on like a split scale between middle and upper. So middle tops out at 770, upper tops at 800. And then they also provide percentiles for grade. They used to do grade and gender, but they thankfully have just put grades together. For a while they were doing like gender and then total, and then they finally just did total on there to make it less confusing. So one thing to recognize is that because it says 800, and I think a lot of people associate the SSAT with the SAT because obviously they're similar names, but there's a big difference on the SSAT. The range is 500, 800, where on the SAT it goes all the way to 200. So like a 550 on the SAT and 550 on the SSAT are very different scores, and where 550 is kind of middle of the road for the SAT, and is it's like middle of the pack, where that would be very low on the SSAT, right? So not understanding that distinction. The SSAT is the only test that you'll probably ever encounter or your student will ever encounter that has a guessing penalty. So wrong questions are do subtract points from the score, and where admit does not. And so one of the first things I do with my students is I explain that guessing penalty to them. Very few states tests like end of course tests do that. The SAT no longer does it. The ACT never did it. The GRE doesn't do it. So this is probably an AP test don't do it anymore. So there's probably the only time your student will ever actually encounter this. On there, so it needs to be understood that it's actually, if you don't know something, and that's likely to occur, especially in the vocabulary. It's hard to build a fully well-rounded vocabulary for the SSAT, within a few months of study. Right, we can definitely improve, but there's still, there's likelihood you're going to see questions that are not, of words you're not familiar with. It's probably better to omit those. So in terms of the scoring, really only the percentiles matter to schools. And it's important that recognize that these percentiles are ranking students who are taking the test and not a nationwide percentile, because a story I see all the time is that a family will go in and saying, oh, our kid is a all A student, and it takes honors math and all this stuff. And then that same student will take the SSAT for the first time and maybe get like in the 40th percentile. Then this causes a lot of, stress within the family. First off, it's important to recognize that this is not a test where you're supposed to be completing and getting, a perfect on. This is a test that is designed to, reveal difference between applicants, right? And it's only students that are taking it that are that are applying to different schools. So all public school students are not taking this. Anyone who's in a K-12 program is not taking this. And understanding that this is, I think, a test. It's a test about testing at its core. Why do schools like it? Well, if you're good at the SSAT, you'll probably be good at the SAT or ACT, because they are similar. There's similar tests in that, like, are you good at testing? Other thing to recommend is that, like, the SSAT is not well aligned with most schools' math curriculum, and so it does definitely, students will have to deal with concepts that are definitely above their grade level on there. So the other thing that you may find is that very few schools will post a cutoff for admission. And the reason is that if they did that, then they would probably not have a particularly balanced student body. One thing is that they need other things, right? If they're trying to build a campus culture, and they want to have sports teams, and they want to have musicians and actors and kids with other interests, right? And so it's important, I think, to when you're applying to private school is think about where your student would fit into that population. Is that student going to be a three sport athlete, or is that a student going to excel at in the marching band? The student interested in drama, the student interested in debate, or doing the science Olympiad, or whatever that would be. Or writing in the school newspaper, and sort of highlighting those things to is part of the application, because the SAT is just one metric in that. I think and that's important to recognize. But the only thing that I would say is that, unlike all those other skills, you can actually change the SSAT. You can improve an SSAT score where the similar amount of time to become a star athlete or virtuoso musician is probably not going to work, right? So a study plan, recognize that a lot of times spaces will fill up. Even the at-home tests are not infinite enrollment, because they have only so many proctors and so much server space. So do make a plan for that, and do try to register ahead of time. I believe that they're going to open a registration, I think, in August for that. So there's still time for this. Figure out what kind of testing your student's going to do. and make sure the student knows the test format, for computer-based testing, know how to use it and then know the rules. So the student is not overwhelmed on the first experience. And then for paper-based, when they find as the students, sometimes have never actually done scantrons or done, don't answer bubbling, and that like they make a mistake on that, especially if they're skipping answers, which honestly they should be, right? Like they forget to skip one, and they can be kind of catastrophic. So teaching good habits on that. Make sure that you understand the guessing penalty. And then it's okay to not answer all questions. Like I've had students get in like 98th, 99th percentiles, and they didn't answer every question. I mean, obviously they did well, right? But like, especially if you're taking it where, like, if you're 8th grade and upper level, or if you're in 5th grade in the middle level, like they don't expect you to get everything right. And you can still do very well without getting, answering everything. I would honestly plan to test more than once. There is I think the first time students do it is more difficult than the second, just because it is different and new. And so kind of building a testing timeline that, doesn't wait till January to start. But yeah, typically end of January is like kind of last time. So a lot of people will keep the flex test as needed if they want to get another testing window in there. And then, early February is about, for most schools, most applications, about is the end of that. So, joining us on June here is a great time to kind of think about this, because it allows you to use some summer planning and kind of, take a longer approach to this, which the next slide says. Slow and steady is going to work better. There's a lot of material for this. A lot of vocabulary studying on this. So if a student is weaker in vocabulary, make vocabulary, a daily activity. And reading older books and getting more exposure to older forms of literature. That's going to be helpful, because you're being able to deal with more kinds of words and different kinds of writing. And then reviewing math concepts, the understanding the fraction, decimals, percentage, ratios, probability, making sure that it did to incorporate some geometry, because there is no geometry formulas on this test. I think those are all like good study plans. Just briefly, there's another thing that they offer. It's called the character skill snapshot. If you buy the SSAT, that test, you also can take the character skill snapshot. It's some schools require it, some schools don't. I include this mostly because I get a lot of questions on what it is. But basically, a student takes it when they want, like at home. It's about a 30-minute thing. And it's looking at these character traits: intellectual engagement, open-mindedness, initiative, resilience, self-control, social awareness, teamwork. You can't, like, it is not to get a perfect score. You get there's no numerical score, but you get, like, in 3 categories: emerging, developing, demonstrating. So you can basically see how much is in there. And then they have these forced choice or situational judgment. And there's not really meant to be a right or wrong answer on there. But the forced choices, you have to choose one you agree with and one you disagree with on there. And there's not like any of these are like, terrible answers, right? But it's just it's just try to show priority in what the student, thinks in there. And then the situation judgment is like, you notice the wrong date on there. And then how would you, you rank the order there? Here, there might actually be like, clearly the worst answer, but then the other, they can, it's a difference of approach, right? Probably raise hand and say the date is wrong I would put that as the not appropriate. But the other ones you could kind of you can kind of see 3 or C and D might, right, they're both very similar approaches to the same issue. Okay, so at this point we're going to start talking about the ISEE, which is a separate test. So let's close off the SSAT. If you have any questions about the SSAT, we've got the Q&A. You can throw a question in there. We'll have a little time to do some at the end. And so for the independent school entrance exam, it's just a different exam, a different test provider, and it has its own scoring and its own rules. So there's 3 different levels on this. There's lower, middle, and upper. The only thing that's different is that in the SSAT, a 5th grader would take the middle level test, but on the ISEE, the 5th grader would take the lower test. And so like that's the big difference between how they split things. It's used for schools that are affiliated with the ERB, just they're EMS and ERB. It's just the SAT, ACT, Coke, Pepsi. They're just 2 different companies providing a similar thing. So the ISEE does have the at-home test as well. That they both went for that option. They also have a prometric test that is similar to the SSAT setup. And then there is, it says paper-based testing at select locations, and we'll talk about what that means on there. So they use ProProctor, it's a different thing. And you can find an available date and time. It's less consistent as the SSAT, but there certainly are opportunities on there. And you'll get the link a few hours before time and do a system ready check. So you have to kind of make sure that you schedule it where you have time to like set it up the day of, where the SSAT will let you set up to like download the program several days before. So the weird differences in rules that during the ISEE, students can only have 2 sheets of paper, 2 pencils, and 2 tissues. No water, but you can cry a little bit. Only have you touched, or have a nose. I don't know, very weird. And they're gonna do the room check just like that, and they even things like want to look at your glasses and stuff. And so and parents can be there. So those are similar in there. Likewise, they take it seriously. Like they're obviously going to be watching the student, and students can reach out to the proctor and through chat and talk to them as need be. So the structure and timing of the ISEE at home is the same as the paper-based test. They're not digitally adaptive or anything like that. And students can have a little bit. They have their breaks, but they may have to do a security check when they come back, make sure they didn't come back with their phone or something. Schools are back 10 to 14 days. So then SSAT is a little bit faster, but this is not really any faster than the normal SSAT or normal, ISEE, all the acronyms. And then so prometric again. You go and you test. It is the same. These slides are basically redundant. So the paper-based testing is a little bit different than the SSAT on the ISEE. So it's only done at ISEE affiliated schools on there. There are not any nationwide testing dates. So you'd have to find a school that is both partners with the ISEE and then also provides the testing on there. And know that it's you can't just make any assumptions about when that testing will be. All right, so we're going to learn some thing about the structure of the ISEE. So its structure is different, and we're going to focus on the middle and upper for the same reason we did for the SSAT. Is this tends to be when more and more students test. So you got a verbal section, and that's going to be a mix of sense completions and synonyms. There's quantitative, which is math again, reading comprehension, which sound like, and then math achievement, which is different than quantitative. It is seeing how much math a student's been exposed to, and then it ends with an essay versus starting with an essay. So the verbal is 20 multiple choice questions and 20 sense completions. So you can see like the synonyms are obviously the same, right, on there, and then the sense completions are similar to the like the SAT used to be like before 2015, kind of logic based vocab tests. And one thing you'll notice is that there's one fewer answers on the ISE, and also like I would say the vocabulary is easier on the ISE compared to the SSAT. The math is not. So the math is there. There's 20 multiple choice questions that just like are all a good range of math and dealing with of logic analysis. And then there are quantitative reasoning questions. Those used to be on the SAT and they're still on the GRE, but there where you have like there's two values you have to determine like which one's greater, or you if you're not sure. So the quantitative, they may deal like with like here they're using instead of using function notation, they're using some quirky symbols here, but it says, you know, if the A goes there to there, you put the 4 in, and you know, and then it's just testing order of operations on there. And they may have a you know, kind of thinking about the logic of things. Understanding that the grace value is an error, what will be the range? So you have to, you have to, you know, get rid of the grace number and then, you know what range means, right? That it would be 24 minus 5. So then the quantitative reasons are weird. Where the answers are always the same. It's a column A is greater, column B is greater. They're equal, or yet it cannot be determined, right? And one thing is, if they give you variables, like try different kinds of numbers. You know, they're positives, negatives, fractions, 0. You know, they try to do different like different ways that it could be. So this is what it looks like. And you know, for column A, column B, I think a lot of students would pick column B on here because to the third power is greater than to the second power. But there's lots of values that actually disprove this. If x equals 0, then they're equal. If x is a negative number, if it's -1, then -1 squared is 1, but -1 to the third power is -1. And so this one actually would be D, cannot be determined, because there's too much on there. And then, you know, things where they're now testing some geometry and lots of you know, words on this, and see a lot of like translation of things. So these can be tough on there. So the reading is 6 passages, 6 questions each. They're typically expository, so they're just kind of telling you a thing about the world. There might be a narrative passage, but they're not very common. It's not going to be old-fashioned passages. It's not, you know, the SSAT will pull from Dickens and Jack London and stuff, and you're not going to see that on the ISEE. They do like questions about structure and purpose. You know, understanding what does this part contribute to the whole. So some of the same things, you know, reading actively, summarizing things, finding answers that don't work. Well, some of the differences would be like there's more vocabulary and context questions, but, you know, always refer them back to the passage. Don't just, if you know the word, pick it, because they do like using figurative language and stuff like that. And they do ask accept and not questions on there. So watch out for, you know, make sure that the author provides all the following as examples of common pollution, common creators of pollution except, right? Those are kind of tricky. And then there's mathematic achievement. So this is basically to see how much math you know. And it's designed to sort of test sort of the limits of students. So, you know, for that 8th grade student, you know, might see like trigonometry and matrices, things that, you know, you may not deal till pre-calculus on there. These are not like, these questions aren't at not being very in depth. They're really just asking, you know, is the student familiar with these? So these kind of things where, you know, like this obviously would be 8th grade level. But understanding differences of squares and like and substitution and stuff, you know, these are, you know, there is an easy way to do this one, but I think a lot of students are, you know, would not know that, you know, unless they know that x squared minus y squared is always going to factor to x plus y times x plus y times x minus y, which then just becomes this pretty simple substitution thing. And then there's essay prompt. It's an open-ended question. Again, not scored, but sent to the schools, same as SSAT on there. One weird little quirk with the ISEE, if they're doing this on the paper version, is that they need to be, it's just needed to write in either a black or blue pen, so they're not able to erase, which is a little bit of a quirk. So that's something I definitely assume we need to be responsible of. So for scoring, there is no guessing penalty on the ISEE, so students should answer all questions. That's the difference from the SSAT. There's a scaled score. It is this weird 760 to 940. Don't know where that comes from. Seems kind of weird for all sections. There is a percentile score and there's a Stanine score. and so percentiles are reported, but a lot of schools are just going to use the stand-ins because the stand-in is essentially a simplified percentile. I think I've got a slide that, yeah. So it's knowing that like it is a bell curved, so that if you look at the stand at 5, it's almost 20 percentiles grouped together, where 9 is only like 3 percentiles. So it's something that like it's not a linear scale, and it's not like a 9 is from 90th percentile to 99th percentile. All right, so the testing timeline on ISEE is important because there is only limited time to take this. So there are 3 testing windows. There's the fall, which goes from August to November, and then winter, which is December to March, and then spring, summer is April to July. So a student can take the test only once per testing window. And really, most of the applications are going to be done between the fall and winter. It's unlikely that a student's going to test for spring and summer. And even if a student was to test now, like in June or July, that would actually that would be for the prior year. Like, so a rising 8th grader would still take the middle level test. So you can't test early. It is meant to be fall, winter, spring, and then new school year, fall, winter, spring. So make sure that that's clear. Because we're in June. You would still have to wait till August to test for the fall. And there's no nationwide testing date. So again, it's finding it with those schools, and then certainly planning to test in the fall, and then possibly again in the winter, depending on how the first test goes. I think is the best and only sensible timeline for the ISEE. Again, things fill fast. Watch out for this, especially because you have to make sure that you know when you're able to test. If you're in a region with not a lot of ISEE schools, there might be only 1 or 2 times that even is option, like there's a place where you can test, right? So again, look at the if you're doing the computer, get used to the format of it. For papering, make sure they're good with bubbling. A lot of these are the same. For student who's trying to go for high score, and knowing that they're going to probably have to push into some new concepts, right? Polynomials, trig matrices, some statistics on there, and that they don't need to master these ideas, but they need to be know the basics of them to get that part done. So we're going to hit launch a poll here for a second, but we're going to be doing our this is our summer sale, and so we do have some great offers, and now is a lovely time to to set up a SSAT ISEE tutoring thing for for the fall, because the hours never expire, so it's a good time to get that established. And you can go to applerouth.com/summer and get all the details on it. All right, and so a little bit of time for question and answers here. So one question I received was is the at-home test similar to what we're seeing with the SAT for the PSAT? And the answer is no. The college board is doing adaptive testing and has really generated a new kind of test form for the PSAT and SAT. The PSAT will be this new digital test starting in October. The SAT will start in March, and if you have a student who is it will be a rising freshman, sophomore, junior, they're going to be dealing with that process. But that tests are section adaptive, and how they've redesigned those tests. So they're going to be like the SSAT, ISEE at home, or they're exactly the same test as the paper on there, and are not adding a new testing element. So there's not a difference in there. And then another question I saw was how important are these applications or these scores? I mean, again, it is some schools require it, some schools consider it. You definitely definitely check on those, because like so a lot of schools dropped them during the pandemic because it was hard to test, but quite a few have already added them back, and make sure that you keep up to date with that on there. And they recognize that these scores are just one metric among multiple things, and not something that is guaranteed to, like, I don't think that you can guarantee you get a certain score that is guaranteed you get in. I've seen students with really high scores that didn't get in for other reasons, but it's something that I think that the big difference is that with some preparation and a little bit of effort, it is a student can improve these scores, and and increase their chances of getting into their dream school. So, well, all right. I thank everyone for hanging out with me tonight, and watching it on a warm June evening. And I hope you all have a good night.